this time, this is really exciting. We have a musician that a lot of you are probably familiar with, a great Carnatic vocalist, Roopa Mahadevan, and she's got a brand new album. Roopa, how you feeling?
Good.
Yeah?
I'm excited, yeah.
Good. So tell me about what was the genesis behind this album? What was the idea?
So, I do a lot of live gigging in and around New York City, in India, and various parts of the country. And what I realized was that I didn't have much music in the interwebs. And, some of my friends would say, hey, where do we go to listen to you? And I couldn't really give a good answer for that if they didn't live in New York City. And, the way sort of people are listening to music now, it is so much about what's available virtually for people. So I decided that I needed to put something out there. And it felt kind of the most right for me to kind of start with my roots, in a sense, and do sort of a more traditional Carnatic album. Because I think, too, that the audience right now that listens to Carnatic music regularly kind of knows where to go already, and there are a few sort of outlets that do that kind of music, and that's there for sort of the insiders, right? But I think I see my audience as sort of broader than that group of people, and I'm really kind of excited to share this music that I hold so close to my heart, and that has sort of formed the basis from all of my musical explorations. To be able to share that on sort of platforms that make it a bit more accessible too, and that bring in some new listeners.
Yeah, and sometimes it's helpful to know something or other about a music if you're new to it. So what are the things that people should know to help them along when they're first exposed to Carnatic music?
Yeah, so one can think of Carnatic music as sort of the classical or art music tradition of southern India. There are obviously many types of musical traditions. This is one. And it's kind of an interesting combination, I would say, of improvised music as well as compositional music. So a lot of the compositions that are sung were created in sort of the analogous period of some of your traditional Western classical music composers in India, so 18th century and 19th century were sort of a rich period of creation for this tradition. So a lot of the compositions are from that era. But then, I would say too that there has been a steady kind of steady sort of productivity, for lack of a better word, of music that has been sort of accepted into the canon. They tend to lean male, and I think on future albums
the composers?
The composers, yeah. And so I would love to take on that project of sort of making more known, the female composers in this tradition as well. But so in this particular album, you will hear composers from the kind of 15th century through today. And the languages predominantly used are Sanskrit, Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada. And Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada are from the southern region of India. And I think it's kind of a wild music. I think there's a lot of dynamic range, so you can hear pieces that are sort of calm and meditative. You can hear pieces that have a lot of frenetic activity. There's a wide range in sort of the pitches that you hear. The subject matter often is devotional, but it doesn't have to be. And we use a lot of different ragas in our concerts. And so if you sit through a 2-hour Carnatic concert, it's likely that you're going to hear at least 5 or 6 ragas.
All right, so you got that on the Hindustani people.
I know. That is true. We fit a lot in there. Yeah.
So this is a historic moment, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to wire up Roopa's computer because this is yet to reach the interwebs that she mentioned before. And what's the piece that you have in mind as a good starter?
Let's start with one of my favorite ragas. It's called Purvi Kalyani. To me, this is a very quintessentially Carnatic raga.
Okay.
For the reason that, on the one hand, it can be poignant, kind of emotional, and feel very like a sincere attempt by someone to communicate something very important to them. At the same time, I think this particular song really shows you how fanciful it can be too, and how there's sort of this undercurrent and kinetic energy about it. That it doesn't necessarily keep you still in an emotion, but you can kind of transform emotionally through the piece. And I actually learned this from a great Carnatic musician named T.V. Shankar Narayanan, who is alive today and received one of the highest honors, the Sangeeta Kalanidhi Award from the Music Academy. And I still today remember the first time I heard him. I was 6 years old in a high school auditorium in San Jose, California, and he was on tour. And I was so taken by the way that he was just so joyful and in flow when he sang, which was in contrast, I think, to the impressions we have of classical musicians as sort of being very serious,
Right.
very inward. It's almost like they could care less whether anyone's watching them. You know,
Right.
He was very ostentatious, but not in a show-off kind of way. You know, you just felt like you had caught him in a great moment, you know? And he was flowing, he was vibing. And just the way he interacted with the accompanying artists, I remember it was Mysore Nagaraj on violin, and then Thiruvarur Bhaktavatsalam on mridangam. And he, you know, they are kind of looking at each other. He's saying, Bale, Sabash, you know, there's sort of this camaraderie on stage, feeding off each other, which I thought, too, was so, so great. And that interaction between musicians is something I've come to love about Carnatic music, that the dynamic range and the types of compositions really allow for that. And that it's truly teamwork. And if you think about sort of the role of the mridangam, for example, as a percussion instrument, it's not just to provide like teka or to keep a beat. It's actually to enhance the composition. And in some ways, you want them to have their own kind of conversational voice, you know, in a composition.
Right.
When you sing a song. And so I think T.V. Shankar Narayanan, for me, really brought that, the vivaciousness that's possible in Carnatic music. He brought that possibility sort of to my attention. And I'm mentioning all of this because he actually taught me this song.
Got it.
And so when I was thinking about what Kriti would I want to include, it was definitely this one. Because for me, Purvi Kalyani was kind of one of the first ragas I really fell in love with.
All right.
Carnatic music. So I will play that. Let me pull it up here.
We're so in the flow here that we didn't want to be so crude as to prepare.
Yeah, no.
You know, we want
Whenever.
to be as natural as possible for the audience and just play whatever came up at the, you know, naturally from our conversation.
This is called Gusts from Elsewhere. So I've given each song an English title as well. This is called
Nice.
Gusts from Elsewhere. It's also called Inda Paramugam Yede. It's in the language Tamil. Raga Purvi Kalyani, a composition of Kavimani Desika Vinayakam Pillai, and it's in an 8-beat cycle, which we call Adi Talam.
All right, let's go.
Inda Paramugam Yede. Inda Paramugam Yede. Inda Paramugam Yede. Yedayan Yede. Inda Paramugam Yede. Inda Paramugam Yede. Yedayan Yede. Inda Paramugam Yede.
right. Music from Roopa Mahadevan's upcoming release. What's the name of the Oh, I know because it's a clever title. It's six yards of Roopa Mahadevan or something like that. Roopa in six yards.
I'm glad you think it's clever because I've been testing it, and a lot of people are like, I think Desi people who know what asari is know what 6 yards is referring to.
Right.
But other people are like, you mean like the yard, like shipyards?
or in football, 6 yards.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The whole 6 yards, right? Like the whole
the whole 6 yards.
I should have named the tracks like second down, 4 yards, like
just one more yard, you're almost there.
Yeah, exactly.
Fourth and one. The tracks with a half. Fourth and a half.
Exactly.
So who the really great violin player Mridama? Who else is on this?
So just
album?
two. Traditional Carnatic music generally has a violinist or a melodic instrument and then a percussive instrument. Mm-hmm. So mridangam, which is like a two-sided drum. Like if you took a tabla basically and like glued the bottoms of tabla, the two tablas together.
Oh, great! I have a set, so I could just do that.
And this is how it all goes downhill. Okay. And then, so on the album are Anjana Swaminathan on violin.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and Rajesh Srinivasan on mridangam.
Great.
Yeah, so both of them I really, really enjoy playing with on stage. They have such positive energy, and it really feels like a team when we're together.
Now, the very end of that piece, was that an improvisation where she was shadowing you so perfectly?
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you said something that piqued my interest. You said that the composers wrote for the mridangam or for the rhythm accompanists as well as for the vocal or melodic kind of lead. Are there times that they're like different, or are they like not a unison thing, or are there times that the melody ends and then they have a particular rhythm written to follow?
So actually, the composition is not written for the mridangam or violin player. It's really written as a song. It's the song, and there isn't a concept of harmony so much in
Sure.
Indian classical music. So really, the harmonics are created through the interplay of the frequencies that you're hearing, the interplay
Right.
of the mridangam and the violin with the voice. And I think that's what's so cool about Carnatic music is I could be singing in a pattern of fours, and the mridangam player could be playing in fives, taka takita, taka takita, taka takita, over my fours. So I think, and same thing with the violin. You're right in hearing the shadowing that happens. And actually, a cool thing that Anjana did in this album is in many places she has created actually more traditional harmonics the way Western, folks think about it,
that's
by
interesting.
holding out, kind of different
Long tones
notes,
and stuff like that.
that create interesting chords. The role of the violin is a very interesting one. I think. I think it would be odd to a listener who hasn't heard this music before to hear, especially in alap, what the role is of a violinist. And I think it's a very challenging position to be in because you have to somewhat mirror what the vocalist is doing and yet bring in your own sort of aesthetic sensibilities to it. And so generally you'll have, during the vocal alap, it'll be the vocalist kind of shadowed in a sense by the violinist, and then the violinist will have his or her turn as well to do a solo. And I think I'm always thankful for that part because then I really
You
feel
have a
like,
break.
and they can do their thing,
Yeah.
rather than being sort of tied to kind of what the vibe that the vocalist is giving.
Sure.
But I think the beauty in working with a few vocalists over time is that they can really start to anticipate your style. And then you also sort of are responding to them too, right? So if I do like, na, ra, na, she might, Anjana might do na or na, na. It's up to her how she kind of shadows me. And then that becomes the thing I'm responding to next.
Right.
So there is actually a conversation that's being had between vocalist and violinist there.
And it's a lot to hold together, right? I mean, you've got to keep these really long compositions in your head, and then you've also got to be, which is much harder than the shorter kind of Hindustani
Totally,
kind
like
of things.
about small bandish.
Yeah, so you got to keep all that together, and then you also have to be present enough to be reacting to all the other things going on.
Yeah.
So what do you do when the chips are down and you see it just evaporates and you can't remember where it goes?
I have had moments where I've forgotten lyrics, or we have a thing called antara, which is like the second verse,
right.
where the melody
the
of
B
the
section.
the B section. So you have A section, B section, and the C section. C is like the bridge, right? But after you pass the bridge in C, you actually have a repetition of B, but with different words. And often the mudra or the composer's signature will be in the second half of C, right after the bridge. But since it has the same tune as B, it's sometimes easy to go and repeat those lyrics. And so that's happened to me before.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm like, well, wait, Tyagaraja's name has to come in here because he's the composer, or, Shama Shastri or Papanam Shivan, whoever it is, their mudra has to be in there. And then, you're like, oh man, I really messed that up.
Right.
I sang their song without attributing anything to that. But, once you're in the flow, you're in the flow. And I think that's an interesting point, because in a way, I think different listeners are there for different reasons. And I think some people are very much lyrics people, and they really connect to that aspect of the music. I would say increasingly more as we are so global in our, language abilities and aesthetics and stuff. I'm seeing more and more people connecting to virtuosity in music, connecting to kind of vibe, groove, and just the raga itself, and the emotions that those elicit, as opposed to necessarily being tuned in to, I think, what the composer intended. And I think that's up for debate, whether that's a good or bad thing. But,
Sure.
Because, truth be told, like you said, we learn so many compositions in so many languages that may not be our own language. And so I think it would be disingenuous to say that I'm always invoking what the composer intended. Because sometimes I don't understand the word for word meaning.
And 500 years is a long time.
Yeah, you know? Exactly. I can barely remember the lyrics to like things I heard on the radio yesterday, you know? But this is where practice comes in. And this is where I think too, if you have a relationship to the bhava, which is the feeling or the underlying emotion of the raga, that's kind of the feeling that you are, or at least this is what I do, that I'm using to drive myself through. So I'm actually releasing a promo video this week where I talk about a particular raga called Danyasi, which is it has such a unique identity that cannot be broken down into a scale, you know? If I sang the scale, you'd be like, oh, that's cool, but it actually wouldn't resemble really.
Go ahead.
It's actually a blues scale going up. Sa ga ma pa ni sa. It's a blues scale. Sa ni da pa ma pa ga ri sa. Okay, so that's basically the scale. But then na ri ri na na la la na mo na 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 ri ra ri la la.
Yeah, the scale is. It's like thinking, looking at a map of a mountain and thinking it's the mountain, right? It's
Right,
like
exactly. It's like it doesn't give you the trees and like the topography or like
yeah,
it doesn't. Yeah. And you know, I kind of talk about how for me, this raga is so driven by like all those other things,
the little movements,
all those qualities. Yeah. And like for me, when I hear ragas like this, I think of like my grandmother, you know, and like doing like puja and like kind of the devotion she had to her goddess, you know, the idol she kind of prayed to every day.
And she would sing when she prayed.
She would sing when she prayed. Exactly. And so for me, that's kind of the space I'm in.
Right.
And even if I don't have that practice in my daily life, what I love about these traditions is it allows you to kind of transport yourself into that world momentarily.
Sure. It's
And
like
that's a beautiful
time
thing.
travel.
Yeah.
And
totally.
so, like someone like your grandmother, I don't mean maybe she studied music, maybe she didn't, but are there people who are just they never actually studied, but somehow they actually know all these ornamentations and they're just like, oh yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's these have come out of people's daily lives. These ornamentations, you know, in some ways, you know, they attribute a lot of the vocalizations to Veena, right? The Veena.
Oh, of course.
So the
yeah.
Veena guy.
Stringed instrument.
Yeah, and that's what you heard. It's the pulling of the string.
Yeah. For those of
Not
you
the most natural, I would say, of vocalizations. But you know, I've heard like there, yeah. When I've heard my grandparents sing, you do hear that kind of the melisma in the voice, you know, and a lot of the emotion sits there. So I think these aesthetics have been built over time. And I think it's interesting because this is very much like theory and practice are like constantly in conversation with each other.
Sure.
So like you'll have a raga where there isn't a particular note allowed in that raga, but if a popular artist of the time uses that new note, then that becomes part of the raga, right? So like,
right.
It's hard to even say actually where some of these things come from. It's community driven in so many ways.
Right. And
yeah.
I guess that the Hindustani music, the people associate that with being music of the courts and the Mughal emperors and Akbar and all these kind of people. But the Carnatic music is much more like of the temples. Is it like, did they have patrons in the same way?
They did. So a lot of these composers were members of the court too. And so they were like kind of commissioned by kings to create. That's definitely true. And there was a temple culture, both in music and dance, of kind of courtesans, temple, you know, devdasis in dance, who kind of were the keepers of a lot of these traditions.
Interesting.
And you know, it's I think over definitely in the 20th century, and there's a great book on this by Amanda Weidman called Voicing the Classical, I think it's called. And she talks about how it became sort of a colonial project of the urban elites to sort of assert the validation of this music by saying, "Oh no, we have this complex notation system," and we have a pedagogy, and to kind of formalize it in this way so that it could be seen on par by the British with other, classical traditions of the West. But I think in some ways that was something that was just sort of made up. I defer. I'm not a ethnomusicologist or historian. Devesh Soneji has been studying this, as have many great anthropologists. But I think there is debate, and I think it's worth researching and talking about kind of who has sort of had the reins of this tradition and what has that done for the aesthetics of it.
For sure.
And it's been in dialogue with, I think, film music too. So a lot of the big players, Carnatic vocalists of the mid 20th century also sang in film. And so you have some of the film aesthetics coming in as well. And you have Carnatic influencing film too. So that, I think, was an interesting point where hybridity started to come into play.
Sure.
But, this has been driven by upper caste urban elites in Madras for the last 50 plus years, more than that. So I think it would be wrong to not address that on some level.
Sure.
But I like to believe that this is absolutely an evolving form, and there are attempts now to kind of talk more openly about how we can kind of make it more inclusive. And for me, by doing this album, I think I'm definitely trying to reach audiences who have not heard this music. And I'm very curious to see what they're getting out of it. If they haven't had a grandmother who would casually sing this in the kitchen while she was cooking, then what does this bring out for them, And I think I grew up in America. I'm a diaspora kid. And so what does this music do for someone like that is also my interest. Which is why I named it in English. All the titles are in English. I'm doing promo videos where I'm connecting it to just like everyday life, because, I would love to see, and not from a preservation point of view, because I don't think you can ever keep anything still. It always has to evolve. But like, it would be sad to me if in 100 years, no one knew what this music was. And no one was putting the time in to study this music or really listen to it with the attention it needs. And I loved what you said earlier in the program about attention span, because I think we're losing it these days,
Wait, what are we talking about?
Yeah, exactly. Half the viewers are probably gone. This is like there's 4 people left listening to this interview.
Speaking of which, let's
let's
hear
do
some
more music. Yeah, okay. I'm going to share a little bit of a slower track. And this was actually by a guest violinist, Shruti Sarathi. And this is called Neera Jakshi, a beautiful raga Hindonam, the equivalent of which is Malkons in the Hindustani tradition. And one of my favorite composers, Muthuswami Dikshidhar. And it's about a goddess. So here we go, Neera Jakshi.
नीरजाक्षि
So your radio was not receding into the distance. We were just fading out there. Just because we wanted to touch upon a couple more tracks before the end. But that was really beautiful. That was a very unique feeling to that one. Kind of a sensual, mysterious feeling there. So you were born in California?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which state? What
Which
part?
state in
Which
California?
state of California?
I know. California is that big, and global warming, it's separating
Right,
into
yeah.
an island. So, Bay Area, San Jose,
Oh,
California. Yeah. And I was very fortunate to learn from an artist by the name of Asha Ramesh, who comes from the DK Jayaraman tradition of Carnatic music. So she was my major formative teacher.
But you always had a liking for this music?
That's a good question. I really owe it to my parents for that, for sort of introducing me to this music. Neither of them are artists or are from artist families, but my dad especially really loved this music. And he never got the chance to kind of formally train. But he is a percussionist. He plays mridangam and morsing, which is like,
right.
There's different names.
Like
the
jaw
Jews,
harp. Huh?
Jaw harp, exactly. That's my best impression.
That puts you in the top 5 morsing vocals.
Seriously.
You're a morsing vocalist.
In New York, certainly.
Yeah. But that's a very popular song, right? The one that you were just doing?
It's a classic, part of the canon. Yes, absolutely. That's all. Yeah, 2 notes is all you need to hear. He would quiz me on ragas on the way to school.
Wow.
He would play music, and it was really inspiring, I think, because I saw how much he had taught himself that this could be accessed by someone who didn't necessarily come from a family where this was, commonplace. So that was one thing that was great. And I saw how kind of he lit up when he heard the music. So it was almost like an instructional guide for how to listen to Carnatic music, And a lot of artists would stay at our house. So they would come on these national tours, and my parents were very involved in the community. And so they would volunteer for these, big shows, and ended up becoming organizers themselves. And so a lot of these artists would stay over, and so I grew up having to sing in front of them, the obligatory.
Right.
My daughter sings. Roopa, why don't you sing? And then that's when you try to disappear from the room.
Right.
Those are all the growing pains, but also really kind of invaluable moments, I think, in my journey.
Wow, that's amazing. What kind of work did your dad do?
He's an engineer.
I was going to guess that, but then I thought it would be like a stereotype, obnoxious thing for you to say.
Although he's a civil mechanical engineer.
Okay.
Yeah,
You're
not a computer
non-tech
guy. No.
Okay.
The real engineering, as he would say.
Physical.
Exactly. So I really have to, thank Appa for that. And, it was like, did you do homework? Did you practice? These were the questions that were asked.
Right.
And my mom, actually didn't know much about Carnatic music when she got married. And I think kind of got schooled by my dad, but she was very much a dancer and loved Bharatanatyam. And so I also trained in that. And that was my first love, actually, and I learned from Indumati Ganesh in the Bay Area in the Varavur style. And I really fell in love, I think, with the mythology of India, with the stories, with the ragas, the emotions of it.
Oh, so that really brings you in better, right? The dance kind of...
Totally. Yeah. And that's why I think I enjoy singing for dance, too, which I do quite a bit. So...
Wow. Well, the clock is ticking.
Okay. Speaking of dance, why don't I play...
Well, we're on the radio. Oh, okay.
I believe my dancing transcends all mediums. Do we have time for 2 songs?
Well, we have 10 minutes, so we can.
Have 10 minutes.
You can just give me the nod.
Okay. So let's play Grand Vishnu Hotel first, which is in the beautiful raga Kapi. There are all these gems in our tradition, like Enatavam Shedane, Jagododharana, that are in this raga, Chinanjiri Kiliye. And so this particular copy is probably not one you've heard before, actually. It's a composition of Mysore Vasudevachar. And I really, really enjoyed this version of it. So that's why I wanted to include it in this album.
Before you play it, I don't want to forget
Yes.
to ask you where people can get the album.
Oh my God!
Because
Very
that would be
important
that would be
question.
like the whole. We'd be like, oh yeah,
I know. It will be available on all the digital platforms. So, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Music, Savan, YouTube. But I would love to direct people to my Bandcamp as well.
which is the most equitable platform for musicians, ladies and gentlemen. If
Thank
digital,
you.
yeah.
Yes. So it's releasing this week on Thursday, December 5th. And yeah, I would so appreciate it if people tuned into this music and shared it with their
Roopa in
friends.
6 yards.
Roopa in 6 yards, a Carnatic playlist. 6 yards refers to the length of a sari, which is the kind of outfit I wear when I wear Carnatic music. So it's kind of an ode to the transformation that happens for me when I wear a sari and sit on a stage.
Great. All right, let's.
So let's hear Grand Vishnu Hotel.
Here we go.
भज माधवं अनीशं भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भुजगारी पदिशयन् देवदेवो भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भुजगारी पदिशयनं देवदेवं भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भुजगारी पदिशयनं देवदेवं भज माधवं अनीशं वासुदेवं भुजगारी पदिशयनं देवदेवं भज माधवं अजरुद्र सुरेश विनुत चरणो अजरुद्र सुरेश विनुत चरणो अजरुद्र सुरेश विनुत चरणो कैलास बलि प्रहलाद चरणो अजरुद्र सुरेश विनुत चरणो गजराज बलि प्रहलाद चरणो भज माधवं हरीशं वासुदेवं भुजगारी.
Okay, and I think for the last one we have Shimmer, which is a Tilana in one of my favorite ragams, Sindhu Bhairavi. So hope you enjoy, and thanks David for having me on the show.
My pleasure. The new album is called Roopa, or the upcoming album is called Roopa in Flux. You can follow Roopa Mahadevan. She has a Patreon page. Keep her afloat. And yeah, thanks for coming. It's always fun.
நாதரதி தீரனா நாதரதி தீரனா தரதிரன நாதரதி தீரனா தரதிரன நாதரதி தீரனா தரதிரன நாதரதி
All right. As we transition to our arts programming, we say goodbye to Rupa. Any special people you want to thank before we?
I cannot fail to mention my guru in India. So I went to India on a Fulbright to study and further my training, and I was so fortunate to come under the guidance of Sugana Varadachari, a leading guru in the Carnatic tradition today. And many of these kritis I've learned from Mami, as well as from Ashanti, Asha Ramesh, who I mentioned earlier. So I would be remiss in not mentioning Sugana Mami. And of course, my parents and all of you for experiencing this music with me.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
listener. And stay tuned. It's time for Studio A.